what I'm going to go through here is kind of seasonally by bloom, not necessarily by color, but just by season. And then at the end, I've got another little section that has a couple lists, just very short lists of some plants with spring, summer, and fall. So with that, let's just jump right in. Perennials are just great plants. Now I don't have it on a slide, but the definition of a perennial is that it will come back season after season, and as opposed to an annual that has a life cycle of only one season. So it'll grow, set seed, and it will die in one season, and then you have to plant a new one or grow the seed the next year. Perennials can be long-lived or short-lived. Some perennials only live 2 to 3 years, and then they'll die. It's not that you killed them or like, what did I do? They're just short-lived in nature. They'll die. Sometimes they'll self-seed and you'll get new ones coming up. So I'll get into how to differentiate and know which ones are which. You look at the tags and understand some of that. But perennials are great plants, lots of range of color, height, texture, the variety of interest, size of flowers, you name it, you can find anything to meet your needs for a landscape with perennial plants. Now, I throw this slide in here because the misconception of low water perennials don't automatically conjure up these images. Now, there's nothing wrong with these images. I grew up in the desert kind of thing, South Utah, Southern Utah, and I love the desert, but this isn't what has to be in a landscape to be low water. Low water can be lush, it can be full, it can be green. Xeriscape is also not xeroscape, and water-wise and xeriscape are usually used synonymously as well as low water. So they don't imply that it has to be barren and cactus, although cactus and yucca and all those, there's some cool plants. If you can understand some of those plants, there's some of the most interesting plants and their adaptations that there are, and they're fantastic, but they don't have to be in our landscapes, okay? And I wanted just to throw out that we have a learning garden. Many of you may be aware of this, maybe not. We have a garden. It's located in Layton at 2837 East, Highway 193. Should have just had the address up there. And the garden, here's an aerial view from a few years ago before we did some construction. And then here's a couple of aerial views since a new building was constructed. Garden changed a little bit, not dramatic, not everything, but the garden is in place to showcase and help you have a site where you can come and just walk around and look at these plants. Not all of them. I've got a lot of plants on here that may not be in our garden because the plant lists are ever changing and the plant varieties are ever growing. There's more and more plants, but you can come up to the garden, walk around, check it out. We've got plants labeled. We're working on a searchable database, so you could use your phone, you could scan a QR code and know about the plant and find these plants. Anyway, so please come visit the garden. It's open 8 to 8 every day through the summer. It is a work in progress. It's continually improving. We're adding, we're changing things. It's intended to be a demonstration site for you to get ideas. Okay, so with that, I wanted to mention just 7 basic principles of water-wise landscaping. Now, the reason I'm throwing these in here, this all ties with perennials. If you understand some principles about this stuff, you'll be more successful. Number one is you have a plan and a design. If you've planned it out, you've thought it through, it's not going to be a disappointment for you. You're going to understand what you're doing and how to do it, and it'll be successful. You understand your soil types. That plays in with how well certain plants grow. Some plants just prefer a well-drained, loose, sandy soil. You put them in hard and heavy clay and water them a lot, they're not going to do well. They're going to drown. They're going to just not do as they intended to do. So understanding that soil when selecting plants, and then when you buy plants, understanding that plant selection of putting the right place in the right plant in the right place. If it's a shaded area, a sunny area, with other plants of similar need, that'll help you with your irrigation and efficient irrigation practices. And then I throw in the practical turf areas, even though this is a perennial class. If you create practical turf areas, you're also going to be more efficient with water. You'll have grass where grass needs to be for function, for play, for animals, but you don't need blanket grass everywhere. And then using mulches, hardscapes, and then of course maintenance. Keeping it maintained is a huge part of having a beautiful and well done water efficient landscape. All right, so I've already kind of emphasized this. Choose the right plants, put them in the right place, and water them properly as far as your perennial plant material goes, and you will be successful. And you'll have years of enjoyment from these plants that you're choosing. So our biggest challenge and biggest problem is generally, I say our, because it's us, people, it's our own behavior. We kill more plants and invite more pests and problems because of what we do with our cultural practices. It's like how we're pruning stuff, how we're mowing stuff, how we're watering stuff, how we're fertilizing stuff. All of these cultural things we do in a landscape, many of the problems we face are because of our own doing. And so if we learn proper behavior when it comes to water and fertilizer and efficiency and all these things, you'll be more successful. You'll have fewer problems and you'll enjoy your yard without necessarily the headache that sometimes comes. So things to think about with perennials. Now, these, I may emphasize these over and over throughout, is you want to look, don't choose perennials that all bloom in the spring. Sometimes we go to the nursery and immediately you're drawn to the things that are blooming. And that's fantastic. You get a whole bunch of cool blooming things and then you get them home and plant them and they all bloom beautifully every spring. And then you have nothing left for the whole season. So get a variety of timing. You need some stuff that blooms in April and then May and then June and July and so forth all the way through October. And then as you do that, you constantly have color in your yard. Make sure to consider the water needs. And like I mentioned already, group plants with a similar need together. If you're trying to water things on the north side of your house the same as the south side of your house, you're in trouble because something's getting under or overwatered because of those different microclimates in your home. Go with the interesting foliage. You don't have to have flowers to have interest in colors. There's some great perennials that just have awesome color in their leaves and the textures and so forth. Look for that, and then you'll always have that color year round, regardless of if it's blooming or not. Don't use straight lines unless you're going for the very English formal garden. Try not to use a straight line. Mix it up a little bit. Do groupings and odd numbers, and mix it up, make it look more naturalized, and it tends to just draw your eye a little differently than very linear, very formal plantings. Now there's a place for those too. We're not opposed to formal gardens. It's just that in an average landscape, you're not necessarily going for the very formal look. Although do what you want. This is your yard. If you love formal, go with that. Focal points. Now the focal point is simply where your eye is drawn. So if you have certain areas you kind of want to highlight in your yard, you're choosing plants that will draw the attention to those parts, specimen type plants, really unique tree or shrubs, and plants that'll really pop the color and kind of draw your eye to that focal place in the yard. Maybe it's by a little gazebo, a little an archway, or whatever it is in your yard that you want the focal point to be. Plants can help draw the eye to that focal point. And then always plan for the full-size plant. When you're designing and planting, baby plants are cute and all, and sometimes we think, oh, there's so much space between those, and so you just pack them all in, not realizing that when that's mature, it's going to be 3 feet in diameter or 2 feet tall, and you've got to plan for that full size. And so those first initial years, it might look a little sparse, but give it 1 or 2 years of growth, everything's going to be full and mature and filled in, and it's going to look fantastic. All right. So with that, let's talk about the tags for just a minute, and then I'm going to jump right into the plants. When you go shopping at a nursery, all the plants are tagged, and on those tags is a wealth of information and knowledge. So it's not just the name and the little picture you're concerned about. You've got, if it's an annular perennial on those tags, you've got the name, both the common name and the botanical scientific name. You have sun exposure, where that should be placed in the yard. And then on the back side, now the fronts and backs of these could be different depending on the brand, who's marketed or who's grown these. But the backs of the tags, as you can see on the far right, that's where you usually have how big it'll get, at both the height and the width, its water needs. A lot of times they have their soil needs, their plant season, or excuse me, flower season, when they're going to bloom. It's going to be March to October. It's going to bloom April to May. It's going to tell you the zone, the cold hardiness zone, which is really important because honestly, there are plants sold here as perennials that might be only hardy to a zone 7 or a zone 8, and you might be in zone 4 or 5. And even though it's classified as a perennial, it's not going to survive our winters here. So you'll plant it, it's great one year, it dies, and then you're all frustrated because you killed your perennial. No, you didn't kill it. The weather killed it. It was not hardy to our climate. So it died, and then you keep trying to do that year after year. So looking at that zone information is really going to help you buy the right plants if you want longevity. Now, there are a few cases, and I've even done this. Purple fountain grass is a great example. It's a perennial, it's a grass, but it's not hardy. But sometimes it's worth buying those just because they're unique and they're great plants, and you're fine putting them as an accent or in a container or something, and you're okay buying a new one every year. That's okay, just as long as you understand that. All right, I've kind of already gone over this. The height, spacing, sun zone, bloom time, yeah, features. All these things are really good. Some tags even come with the pairing ideas, what it goes good with, a few other plants. And usually when they talk about pairing, it's either because of flower colors, yellows and purples, yellows and blues go together. There could be other reasons just on height or season of bloom when they're blooming. And so anyway, so let's go with that. Now there was a question really quick, and I think Hattie Ann may be able to answer that one. What is the sunset zone? Your zone, your hardiness zone, don't worry about the word sunset. It's just different classifications of who's doing the zone, sunset zones. Anyway, it's a hardiness zone. It means the zone of climate at which a plant will do best, or at which point a winter will kill it. And so for the most part, along the Wasatch Front here, Davis and Weber counties, we're like a zone 4 to 5. Sometimes you may see it on map as a zone 6. So if you get a zone 7 plant, it's likely not to make it through our winters. We may have a really mild winter one year, and you may end up having one survive. But typically, along the Wasatch Front, you're safe with zone 5 and 6 plants. On the Wasatch back, in the higher mountain valleys, almost always you're at a zone 4 or less. If you get zone 5 and 6 plants up there, they usually freeze through the winter. But that kind of gives you a good idea of the zones. So anyway, so all right. With that, we're going to move right into plants. We're going to first talk about bulbs. Now, bulbs are not technically perennial plants, but they are because they come back every year. And I love to throw them in here because bulbs are fantastic. Bulbs are a great early addition to any landscape that provide the color and interest in the spring when everything else is just coming out of dormancy. You've got a nice burst of color and liveliness, and everything else is just barely green and coming up. So I love the use of bulbs in a perennial landscape. They're extremely water wise. I mean, you're not watering all these. They're getting water with other perennials, but once you plant them and get them growing, there's really very little care. You have to deadhead them and cut down the dried up stalks once they kind of dry out in the spring, once they're done flowering. But they're well worth the effort for the color and the interest they can bring early in the spring. So of course we've got tulips. I'm not going to go through all of the varieties. If there are hundreds of varieties of these things, tulips at different sizes, different colors, different interests. So there's just lots and lots of tulip varieties you can choose from. One thing to be aware of, if you're in a deer-prone area, deer will eat tulips. They love them. They'll eat them. If they're not buried too deep, then as they pull, they'll actually pull up the entire bulb and everything and eat them. So that's one caution. Daffodils, also fantastic. Now, it used to be daffodils were always just yellow. You had a yellow daffodil and you had the old-fashioned red tulips, and that was kind of it. Now there's every color of daffodil. You got pink ones and white ones and yellow ones and mixed orange ones and all kinds, multi-ruffled, daffodil cups, and almost where they look like, they call them peony flowering tulips or peony flowering daffodils, and they're really fluffy, and sometimes the heads on them are even so heavy they kind of almost hit the ground, but beautiful and deer resistant. In this case, daffodils, deer just usually don't like the narcissus family, the daffodils. Crocus, another one. These are really early bloomers. You can see they can kind of be naturalized into a lawn area. They can be naturalized into beds. Great little bulbs. Not as much range in color. Usually they're kind of purples to yellows to pink, that kind of stripy, bluey like the one you see in the bottom there. But great little plants. And then ornamental onions. These are the alliums. You've probably seen some of these, kind of a range of these as well. They're just interesting. They're in the onion family, but they're kind of a great little, showpiece bulb that's usually not early spring. They're more late spring. And we've got a variety in the garden that's actually blooming right now. They're quite tall and big, and they're blooming now. You've got not technically bulbs, but you got mini iris. Snowdrops are a bulb. Windflower is kind of a corm, just a small shriveled little tuberous type root thing. And then hyacinths. Hyacinths are a true bulb. And then you've got the little grape hyacinths that I don't have a picture of because they are weeds. Well, not really. They're cute little things. They just spread, and some people, once you get them going, they are weeds. They spread into everything. So I didn't show those here. So now I think let's get into the perennials. There is one question though. Oh, it looks like Hetty Ann's probably typing that one about bark. She'll just finish typing that one. There's one other question here before I go in. We planted quite a few bulbs, only about 75% came up the following years. It's been pitiful. Is this probably a soil issue? It could be a soil issue. Maybe it is. That's an interesting thing. We've planted bulbs in the garden at work here at the office, and there's only a small percentage, I think, that don't come up. For the most part, they all come up. So maybe it's heavy soil. Maybe it's when hopefully you're planting those bulbs in the fall. If for some reason you got a great deal and they overwintered somewhere and you're planting them in the spring, they're not going to do it. They're not going to work. So maybe it's a timing thing. Not quite sure. Maybe it's a soil issue. So good luck there. You'd have to maybe do a soil test to see if there was a soil problem or something that way. And then how do I determine what my soil type is? You can do your own little soil test. Take a jar, put a soil sample in it, kind of get as much core of the soil you can, shake it all up, put some water in there, shake it up, put just a tiny bit of dish soap in there. It'll help break apart the soil particles, just a tiny bit. And then they'll settle out in layers where you can kind of get a percent sand, silts, and clays. And if they're about equal, then you have a pretty good loamy soil. If it's heavy on the sand, you'll see a big layer of sand. If it's heavy on the clay, you'll see a quite thick layer on the top of clay. Organic matter floats. And then you can determine that, or you can go to Extension and actually have a soil test done with Extension. It'll cost you, I think, $25. They do a whole sampling, a soil sample kit for you, tell you how to do it. And then anyway, you got those options, and they'll give you a whole breakdown and analysis of micronutrients, macronutrients, and the whole deal. But those are the recommendations there. Let's see. Okay, so I think Hetty Ann's answering the last questions there. I'll just move on. So let's talk about spring. I'm gonna kind of go through these in spring. Again, I'm not gonna talk about all the text here, the plant features, because it would take us too long. And I've got a lot of stuff here, and I don't want to keep you all night, because you may want to get out in your yard. It's a little cooler today. So rock daphne. Now there's a lot of daphnes. Daphnes are beautiful little plants. Now the daphnes, the range, they grow from 12 inches tall to a little taller. Some daphnes are a couple feet tall. They can get quite wide, 3-4 feet wide. This particular one, 12 inches tall, 3 feet wide, grows for rock gardens, does best in well-drained soil, an early spring bloomer, best in full sun. Beautiful little plants. Daphnes are sometimes hard to find. It almost seems like the nursery industry's phasing out of them. I'm not quite sure why, because they're great little plants. But if you can find one, great plant. It's just an awesome plant. Pasque flower. This one is a true perennial, and it blooms. It's blooming really early in the spring. This is blooming with the daffodils. And there's a couple varieties of a couple colors of this. You can get kind of that purple, and you can get white. And it grows less than 12 inches tall. Once the flower is done, you see the picture on the bottom there. The seed head is just kind of that very interesting, I don't even know how to describe it. Looks like something out of Dr. Seuss almost. But anyway, it's this really interesting seed head. It's not aggressive. It's not a self-seeder where you're just going to have these everywhere in the yard. But they're a nice kind of tidy, clumpy forming perennial, true perennial that blooms really early, kind of for a zone 4, cold hardy and the whole bit. Basket of gold. you know what? It has the wrong botanical name here. I apologize. This is not a penstemon. A basket of gold it's a spring blooming. All of these are spring for now. It'll bloom early spring to early summer. Beautiful yellow gold, a true nice yellow gold. 1 foot tall, 3 feet wide, nice kind of mounding, spreading, but not, it doesn't really root in as it goes. It stays a clump. Best in full sun, good for rock gardens. It can burn a little bit in the really hot summer. So this time of year, well, June's been a little abnormally hot, but typically kind of end of July into August, this plant can look a little bit rough. It doesn't die. It just kind of looks like it's hot. It looks, like, okay, I'm done my thing. I've flowered and I'm just done. I'll endure the summer and then bloom again great next year. So it's best to plant these where something else comes up and takes its showpiece later. This one can fade and not look great because something else is really showy around it. It draws the focal point and the interest away from the kind of that hot, tired looking perennial that's already done its blooming in the spring. Shasta daisies. Now these are kind of an old-fashioned perennial. These might be, for some, have recollections of these as kids, or or your grandparents, or something. Some people don't really use Shasta daisies much anymore, but there's a lot of great varieties. Some are short. You can get little varieties that are only 12 inches tall. There's even little mat daisies that are ground covers. Some of these get 3 feet tall. They bloom kind of the late summer. This may have actually fit into the summer instead of spring bloomers, but into June and July, they're blooming now. And so June is actually kind of still, June is kind of still spring. At this point of June, we're kind of summer. But it prefers full sun to part shade, a little bit of shade, not full shade, fertile soils, once a week watering, deadhead the spent flowers, and cut it back in the fall. It's a great plant. Red hot poker is, let's see. There's a question, before I get to red hot poker, there's a question that says, do I have an opinion on biochar? That's a great question because I don't know if I'm familiar with the term biochar. Type in a follow-up question on biochar. I'm not familiar with that term. Maybe I'm familiar with some other term that's the same thing, or I'm just, wow, I'm out of the loop on that one and I don't know what biochar is. I'm imagining it has something to do with burning something to create nutrients for the soil, but I don't know. Type in a follow-up question on that one and we'll get to it. All right, so red hot poker. You've seen some of these. Now there's a few different colors of these as well. There's a yellow, more yellow to just a tip of red. There's some that are more red all the way through, and then more that kind of this mix where yellow to orange to red. Now this says it's a summer bloomer, and I probably shouldn't have put it in the spring section, but it's very drought and heat tolerant. Once it's done, the foliage actually has kind of a grass looking appearance, so it adds a unique texture in with other perennials, if nothing else. And there is one variety of these that will bloom in the fall. We had one in the garden for a while. I believe it got removed in construction, where we had a group of them bloom in the spring, and then we had a different group in a different location bloom in the fall. So it's kind of cool. One time you just cut it back in the spring, back to the ground, super easy. And let's move on to a couple of other spring ones. Rock cress, the abricias. Early spring bloomers. You've seen these, I'm sure, as you drive around in the spring. Now, this can also get a little bit, you may confuse rock cress with, oh shoot, now it's just leaving me. Oh, I hate it when that happens. It's right on the tip of my tongue. It fades. You can confuse this with other ground covers that bloom in the spring. Oops. Oh. Anyway, I hate that. Sorry about that. Anyway, full sun, part shade. It's great for rock walls, great for rock gardens, great for foundation plantings, border plantings along your walkways or anything like that. And I'll probably, the other perennial, it's super common and it's right in my head, but I'm so much stuff here. It'll come to me in a second and then I'll jump back to it. Sunrose is another great one. Lots of color and interest in sunrose. These are early spring. These are kind of a woody, shrubby perennial. They're evergreen in the winter. They bloom late in the spring and lots of color options. So here's some more sunrose. You kind of have oranges to pinks to reds. This kind of pink, quite a variation. There's yellow, there's white, a lot of great things with sunrose. And they're nice little mounding, spreading, 24 inches wide, fairly low growers. These are great little plants, hardy to zone 4 to 9. So if you ever come across these, they're certainly worth using because you can get them in almost any color. And so it's a nice plant with that wide range. If you're really looking for white, well, you can get a sunrose in white, or you can get a sunrose in pink. And so anyway, that's one of the great features about it. So yellow corydalis or yellow bleeding heart, it's often not referred to as yellow bleeding heart. You'll see it as yellow corydalis more often. And it is a full sun to part shade. It doesn't do good in the really hot sunny spots. It's good in sun, but I wouldn't put this on your south or west exposure. This is better in a sunny spot, but cooler sun. Moist, it actually prefers a little bit moist. This is not really on the WaterWise list, although it'll tolerate drier conditions, but it prefers a little bit more moist, but well-drained soils. Heavy clays, no. Well-drained, but kind of moist. That's why on the north and east, it'll get sun. It'll get some good sun in the morning maybe, and then get shaded from the heat of the sun in the afternoon. That's the kind of site. Plus it stays a little more moist than drying out so hot on the south sides. It will kind of go dormant in the heat of the summer. So if you have one of these and it kind of looks just really bad, it's kind of natural with the extra heat. It kind of starts shutting down a bit. It'll come back the next year. Candy tuft is a half shrubby kind of dwarf semi-evergreen type shrub. You've seen these. Dark green foliage, nice little mounding. You don't have to trim them that way. They're just nice little mounds with a snow white flower on them. Great border plants, rock garden plants, anything like that. I've got a couple of these in my yard, and I like them. And they're not super fantastic. They're not like that wow plant, but they're good plant. They look good, and when the flowers are done, the foliage of it's just that it's a deep dark green, and the foliage looks nice. So just for the foliage itself, even though there's not a lot of color, it's still a nice plant. Columbines, these are shade. If you have some good shade somewhere, they will not thrive in full sun. They burn and they just don't do well. Occasionally you'll find one in the sun, but not the hot sun. So if you've got a shaded area, understory under plants, north sides, just the shaded areas, columbines do quite well. And there's lots of the nice soft foliage, but it's also a lot of color options. Columbines come in almost every color, blues to yellows to white, orange, you kind of see a whole range. And then we've got daylilies. And so daylilies, again, one of those that have just a huge range of color. These are very traditional, and some people really think daylilies are overused, and maybe they are, but they're such a great plant that's why they're overused. But the cultivations of these have allowed more and more interest, where it's not just your standard yellow daylily or orange daylily. You can get deep, dark purple ones, and this whole range, pinks and so forth, and they tolerate fairly good range of tolerance. The foliage is again kind of grass-like, so once they're done, it's not an ugly plant. It creates a different texture and interest in the landscape, but quite variable for color and good for full sun or part shade. So I just remembered, back to rockcress, it's creeping phlox. Phlox is one of those that flowers really bloom in the spring, pretty in the spring. So sometimes phlox and abritia, the rockcress, are blooming at the same time. And so if you don't look at them close, just a quick drive by, you might not know the difference between creeping phlox and rockcress. Anyway, sorry, that was a diversion. I just remembered what I was thinking. All right, so back to another shade plant, spotted dead nettle, also referred to as lamium. You probably know it as lamium. Sometimes the common name and the botanical name are the same. This is a fast growing, used as a ground cover. It's fairly low to the ground. It flowers pretty in the spring. You can get variegated varieties, you know, where the leaf is multicolored. Usually they're very light. They don't do well in the hot spots. So you're going to put it in a moist, again, kind of north sides, east sides, the moist understory, well-drained soils, but more moist or wet. And we do have some of these in places of our learning garden that are a little drier, and they'll do fine in dry shade. They just don't love the hottest part. They don't love heat and the hot sun. So a few more springs, and then we're going to move into summer. The firecracker, excuse me, the firecracker penstemon. Now, I'll show quite a few penstemons. Penstemons are really interesting plants. And there's a lot of cultivated varieties of penstemon, and there are native varieties of penstemon. Utah, we're in what's called a transitional zone. And so we're actually kind of at the center of diversity for certain plant species, and penstemon happens to be one of those. In the Rocky Mountain Range, and Wasatch Range is a little bit off of the Rocky Mountain Range, but kind of right through the Intermountain West here with the Rocky Mountains and the Wasatch Mountains. These ranges technically go all the way to Canada and all the way to Mexico, even though they're not as big or whatever, but they range all the way across the north, all the way to North America pretty much. And funny enough, penstemons are found in that whole range, but Utah happens to be kind of in the middle of that range. So we're the center of diversity. And there's actually a lot of penstemon varieties or penstemon species here. And they thrive in our soils, they thrive in our climate. Some of them are higher elevation plants, some of them do well lower elevation. If you go hiking much in the foothills in the spring, you'll see these just naturally growing. And so kind of keep your eye out. Firecracker penstemon is one of those that's a native. It grows wild out in the foothills, but it makes a great landscape plant. That really nice red, hummingbirds love it. If the hummingbirds are around at that time. Sometimes hummingbirds in their migration maybe miss this one, but a lot of times we'll see hummingbirds with it. And the only thing you need to do with this is once it's done flowering, you just cut off the dead heads. You cut off the dead flower stalks. Flowers are up a nice little stalk, alternating, all flowers up the way, and just a great little plant. Does really well here. Firecracker penstemon will not do well in heavy clay. I'll caution you on that. If you have a heavy clay soil, then you're going to struggle with this one. It does not like to be soggy in heavy soil. It would do much, much better once it's established in unwatered sandy soils than heavy clay. It'll drown and rot in one season. So I had a couple questions here as well. Do you cut back creeping phlox in the fall? No, you don't have to do a whole lot with creeping phlox. I just leave mine, and then in the spring you just rake it a bit, kind of rake out any dead. If you cut it back, you kind of defeated it, the point of it creeping and mounding and getting bigger every year. So just leave it, and then it gets matted and a little bit brown, and then just kind of rake through it a little bit. Don't rake it too aggressively; you'll pull it all out. But other than that, you'll be fine with that. I wouldn't cut it completely back. Maybe give it a little trim if there's some that are out of line or something like that. All right, so back to penstemons. Rocky Mountain penstemon, a very nice blue. These are beautiful penstemons, and like I said, I'm only showing you here just a sampling of what's available. Now, not everything may be available in the nurseries right now, but I'm talking about available in the market. And some of these you can actually even order online. There are nurseries, online nurseries now. They'll ship you the little plants in a 4-inch container, got them all boxed up. They ship them, and even though they're boxed in that box and they're dark for 2 days in shipping, they'll get them to you. You open them up, they're perfect, in great condition. They do well. So if you can't find something in a local nursery, consider a mail order, not too much more expensive, and get it there. But Rocky Mountain penstemons, a great blue, same thing. You cut the dead heads back. It may rebloom a second time, maybe, but not guaranteed. It just depends on the year. Low water, this is a native one, grows out in the foothills. Gooseberry globe mallow is a great orange with kind of a gray-green foliage. Now, if this isn't your cup of tea, that's fine. There's lots of other options, but funny enough, there's not a lot of really true orange flowers like this. There's hybrid colors and there's some orange, but This is a great native plant. It blooms in the late spring into summer, full sun. You'll see these out in the wild as well, but most of the time in the wild, they're not going to get quite as big because of the, again, lack of moisture. We tend to overwater a little and make our plants really big. If these get too much water, they will kind of flop open. They'll just kind of get heavy and do a little flopping. So keep it lean on these once you get them established. They don't really need much maintenance. You'll cut them down once a year, once the winter death or whatever, late fall into early spring. Palmer's penstemon, this is a really tall one. It can get about 4 feet tall with the flower stalks, 4 to 5 feet tall, white to pink flowers, very fragrant. Not all of them are fragrant. This one is fragrant. It smells great and it attracts bees. They all attract bees. This particular picture is a clump of several plants together. It's actually 3 big plants together, and it made a giant mass that's about 4.5 feet in diameter and just this huge color and fragrant mass. The picture below is what it looks like when you cut down all the flower stalks, but it is semi-evergreen, kind of attractive foliage, kind of a gray-green foliage that will stay green through the winter months as well. Pike's Peak Purple Penstemon is the purple in front, and now it's grouped with yellow yarrow. But notice how the purple and yellow go good together. That's what we talk about groupings. A lot of people want to group certain things that just color-wise, if you got a color wheel out, and the complementary and all the color type schemes, purple and yellow go good together. But this is a great spring bloomer. One of several of the Mexicali hybrids, it's Penstemon X Mexicali. There's a few of these. There's Pike's Peak Purple. There's a pink one, Elfin Pink, that I've listed on the slide. There's several, and again, another great penstemon. I'll move into now. There are dozens more. I can't stress this enough. I'm only showing you a few of what's available. There are some plant databases out there. You can go shopping at the nursery. You'll see all kinds of plants that you've never heard of before and that I'm not talking about here tonight. Doesn't mean they're not a great plant. Do your homework and look at the tags, do that investigation. These are just some samples of some great plants that I know of, that I'm very comfortable talking about, and that we've grown and have experience with, and that do well in a low water landscape. So lavender is one of those for summer. We're going to transition here to summer. So with summer, our lavender, of course, everyone knows lavender is used for oils and fragrance and all kinds of stuff. Well, you can grow it in your garden and you can do all that stuff. You can dry it out. I've never known how they extract the oils, the process of heating it up and doing all this stuff, boiling it, whatever they do. But you could, if you grow this and you want to go through all that process, it's the same lavender. You can grow it. The variety here is listed as hide coat. There are other lavenders that grow well here. You just cut it. You can cut it back yearly. You can deadhead it when the flowers are done. Keep those flowers, like I said, dry them out, use them. But to keep them, they do form a woody tissue in the insides. And I usually don't like to prune them hard until spring. Sometimes if you cut them back too early in the year, they'll get winter damage or winter kill, at least from my experience. Husker's Red Penstemon, another penstemon, deep purple foliage, the white flower on top, great combination. This is not a native, this is a cultivated variety of these. Beautiful though, just a great plant. The attractive nature of the green and the purple foliage with the white flower, just a great combination. Burgarten sage. So this is actually the herbal sage. There's a few varieties of these. There's the tricolor sage, there's a purple sage, they're the Salvia officinalis. These are great. Not only are they the herbs that you'd grow, but these are great perennials in a landscape, and they will flower. They're usually not grown for the flower. They're kind of grown for the foliage and just how they grow, but they will flower, and they can tolerate drought and heat, and they're just good plants for that, but they're also very attractive plants. So here's a picture of sage. This is the yellow kind of, what's the name of it? Anyway, it's a yellow variegated version. And then you have the kind of the more traditional kind of a purple color there. There's like the picture before here, the one on the bottom, the tricolor sage, kind of a purple and variegated look. Great little plants. Here I have Shasta Daisy again, because it's that spring to summer. Won't spend much time here. May night sage. Now there's a few of these, the salvias. This one's a deep purple, but there's a pink sage, meadow sage, that also looks great. This one, the May-night sage, is actually, there's one that's also a little more blue than purple, but these are great plants. And if you deadhead these, they will usually give you 2 or 3 blooms a season. The second and third blooms are never quite as showy, but if they're cut back deadheaded, not all the way back, just down into the foliage again, you cut those back, they're gonna bloom again, because the plant, not all the plants do this, but this one does. Its goal is to set seed, right? It grows because it wants to reproduce itself and make seeds. Well, when you come along after the flower and you cut all those dead flowers off, well, the plant no longer has seeds that it can mature. So it triggers a mechanism to say, oh, I still have growing season. I will try to produce more seeds. So it grows more flowers, trying to produce more seeds. So you get the idea. Many of the perennials will do that. Not all of them, but many of them will do that because they grow fast enough and they can produce a mature seed fast enough that you'll get multiple blooms as you continue to deadhead those. So here's a few varieties of this. Rose Queen, Ostfriesland. These are kind of like German names that I'm not good at pronouncing. But the salvias are great perennials, great plants for a landscape. Got red hot poker in there again for summer. It's a spring, summer. Skip that one again. Lumbago, dark green foliage, mounding, spreading, that nice bluish, darker flower on a dark green foliage. These kind of turn a bronzy, what do you call it? Well, it's just a bronzy burgundy color in the fall. So a great plant, border plant, kind of a tall ground cover that will spread. It's mounding and spreading, but not an aggressive spreader that's going to just take everything over. It's not vinca. This is definitely not vinca. Just a great low water, easy to maintain, good plant for border plants. Full sun to part shade. Red valerian or Jupiter's beard. Now this is a beautiful plant, and it's a summer bloomer, also a white variety, tolerates lots of low water, tolerates a range of conditions. But I will caution you one thing. My experience with this is I really like this plant, but I really hate this plant. It's a weed. I caution you, it's a beautiful perennial, but it's a prolific seeder. So it sets seed and the seeds drop and you'll get lots of new little red valerians growing up, almost like a carpet of red valerians growing up if the conditions are right. And everywhere I've tried to grow this, the conditions are right and it seeds prolifically. Now some have maybe had better success with that and no seeds, it just depends on where you are. But otherwise, I love the plant though. It's a beautiful plant and it's a great water-wise plant. It's just, I don't love to weed out all the little seedlings that come up from it. And maybe if I was more proactive on deadheading it quicker, it wouldn't have time to set those viable seeds and I'd have better success. But if you miss that window and it has mature seeds that drop, my experience is that it will self-seed if the conditions are good. Lupins, gallery lupin hybrids. These are great little plants for cooler climates. I mean, I shouldn't say cooler climates, they grow here, but cooler areas of your yard, the microclimates of your yard where it's a little more shaded, a little cooler, definitely not south or west exposures. And there's a range of color in these too, reds and pinks, yellows, whites. They bloom into the early summer. They're a nice addition. I like them. They're not technically, I wouldn't really throw these into a water-wise plant list per se, because it depends on the microclimate where they're planted. But any mature plant, once it's mature and established, if it's been watered properly, you could consider it water-wise because you're only watering it once a week. Yes, it's in the shade, it's in a cool part, so it's not drying out nearly as fast, but you're still only watering it once a week, so therefore it's considered water-wise for our climate. Here's another one that I really like, Coral Canyon Twin Spur. This is one that blooms all the time. It blooms longer. If you give it a little extra water, this will kind of bloom all summer. Once it starts blooming in the summer, it'll bloom all the way till frost if it's got the right conditions. Otherwise, it'll bloom, have its major flux of blooms, and then it tapers off, and maybe you'll just have spotty blooms, like that picture in the middle there. that's probably a condition where it got a little bit drier, a little hotter midsummer or something, and it's just not as full, prolific of blooms. Whereas the bottom picture there, it's a little more covered, full blooms all the way around. Another penstemon, Rondo mixed penstemon, summer. Now I show this picture because it has multiple colors. With Rondo mix, unless it's blooming when you buy it, you may not know what color you have because it's a mix. It's kind of the blues to pinks to dark purples, and they all look the same other than the color. And depending, if you plant two of these together, sometimes you get the mix, and I like them. I really like these. I've had them in yards. I currently don't have it in my yard. I'm actually in the process of doing a lot of home renovation. Maybe you can see my background. It's half my house is torn apart and half my yard's torn apart. But penstemons, Rondo penstemons have been in other yards I've had, and they do really well. They're great little plants. Deadhead them once. These ones are ones that will send up multiple blooms as they're deadheaded. Chocolate flower. Now this one is fun. It's very informal. Okay, so informal meaning it's not a tight, nice little mounded plant that you sometimes just love because they stay where they are. This one won't spread. It's not a crazy spreader, but it's not formal. It just kind of has a habit that's loose and airy and kind of rangy, I guess you could describe it. But it's called chocolate flower because the flower does smell like chocolate. Now it's about 12 inches tall, although 12 is low. I would say 12 to 24 inches tall on the high end, probably somewhere in between, like 12 to 18. Very, very drought tolerant. Once it's established, hardly needs any water at all. Summer flowers, low maintenance, one time a year cleanup. And I will mention this though, if you put this in, every morning it's bright and yellow like this, and it smells very fragrant. The flowers they have that chocolate smell. As the heat of the day comes on, the petals are yellow, but on the undersides they're green, and the petals themselves actually curl, and it almost looks like all the flowers disappear by 2 o'clock in the afternoon. You hardly notice the flowers on it. It's like they've disappeared, but the petals have just curled a little bit, and so it looks more green. And then the next morning when it's cool, they're all opened and bright and fragrant again. So I like it. It's a cool plant. Like I said, it's informal. It doesn't fit in every space. If you're trying to do something formal, this just doesn't fit. But otherwise, this one's a great plant. Certainly could be considered into your landscape. Wild thing sage is a beautiful little plant. Now, I would caution you on some of the Salvia greggii. There's a few cultivations of these, and they are borderline hardy. Even though on my slide here it says zone 5 to 10, these are kind of like the 5-6. And like maybe if you were labeling 5A or 5B, these would be on the cold. They need warmer than 5. They need the 5B close to 6. So depending on our year, they survive just fine. If we had one of those years that we have an early, really hard cold, like we've had in the past that kills rose bushes and all that stuff, it would kill this one. If we have kind of the normal year, these usually survive. When we get snow cover, the snow insulates, it keeps things well. It just depends year to year if this one's going to survive our winter or not. But very drought tolerant, beautiful foliage, beautiful color, just a great plant. The Salvia family has just so many plants that do well in our climate that are beautiful flowering. They just look great. I've got a lot of penstemons in here because they're just great plants. Red Rocks penstemon. This one is another Mexicali variety. So they're a little different. They're a little shorter than some of the other native varieties, but moderate water, lasting blooms. If you get it less water, the blooms go faster. Some of these penstemons, if you want them to, they can self-seed. You just don't deadhead them, and they'll produce seeds, and then they're not terrible. They'll have some seedlings come up, and I've let some go to seed in the past because I want those seedlings, and then I dig those little seedlings up once they're a few inches tall. I dig them up and I move them to other areas where I want them in my yard. And so that's one of these that, the Red Rocks can do that. All right, Zagreb Coreopsis. There's many Coreopsis varieties, And you'll see them anywhere. You'll see them at nurseries, at Home Depot, at Lowe's, you know, all the places. This particular one, Zagreb, it's a nice, this hasn't been trimmed to look like this. It's just natural growth habit is nice little mounding, 18 to 24 inches tall, full sun to part shade, blooms in the midsummer. No deadheading on this. It just blooms and it keeps blooming. It'd be really hard to deadhead all these little flowers and they should just cut way down into the plant. So you don't need to do that. You just water it once a week, and it's established. In an average landscape, you're probably watering this twice a week. We've had this in the garden. It waters with everything else on some of the zones where, you know, twice a week and a drip system is what we've done, and it's beautiful. So this picture would have been from our garden, or a similar garden. Jordan Valley has a garden similar. They have this in that garden. Flying saucer coreopsis is another variety. Notice here the flowers are a little bit smaller. They seem a little star-shaped. Now, of course, the pictures, this may be a little up close, but these are a little bit different shape of flower. And that's what you'll find with many coreopsis. And some coreopsis aren't even yellow. It's kind of an orange. There's kind of a white with different colored centers. Quite a range of coreopsis that do well for our yards here, our landscapes in this climate. If you want a little bit lower growing penstemon, pine leaf penstemon is a great one. And there's two colors. There's a red pine leaf and a yellow pine leaf. And they're a little lower, meaning 12 to 15 inches tall. They kind of spread a little wider. So they can be, you know, 18 to 24 inches wide, easy cleanup, not really any pests or problems or anything. And this one's later, so definitely hummingbirds are drawn to the red on this one. Bridges, another red penstemon. And you're probably thinking, wow, I'm sick of those. They're just great plants. They're not always available. Some of these you may have a hard time finding from as a start, but you may be able to find them as seed, and many of them are easy to grow from seed. Some are not so easy. But this one, if you could find it, it's a summer red. If you love red, and that's why I showed the diversity of colors here. Some people just don't love red flowers. They're going to go with more of the purples and the pinks and the yellows. Some people love red. If you love red flowers and need a summer bloomer, this is a good one for that. Still, the blooms last a fairly long time. It's only going to bloom once. Deadhead it, it's done. One time a year maintenance. Let's talk about blanket flowers, the gaillardias. Now, blanket flowers have come a long way. They're kind of used to be just the standard blanket flower, which is what you see in the main picture. You know, and it's kind of a mix of oranges, reds, and yellows together. It's your average blanket flower. Now there's a lot of cultivated varieties of these to where you have very, very bright yellow. It's 100% yellow, or orange, a light shades of orange, like a tangerine color. I think they have one variety is actually tangerine. You have a burgundy blanket flower that's a deeper red. These are great bloomers. They kind of keep blooming. If you want to deadhead them, it's not, because notice even in the picture, some of the flowers are right in their prime. Some have already kind of been spent. They're done. So if you can go in and selectively prune out the spent ones, then this will continue just to bloom pretty much all summer. And you know, it's a lower grower, not too aggressive. It makes a great addition in a landscape, although it's kind of an older plant. It's not, you know, something new in the market recently. So I think for some people, they kind of shy away from it because it's like, oh, that's one of those old crappy plants or something. But no, it's a great plant for a waterways landscape. Hibiscus. Now, I've only showed a couple of colors here and they're all kind of the same. I should have done a little better job on the pictures because there's some great, these are not the shrub hibiscus. This is your rose mallow or your dinner plate hibiscus, the great big flowers. Like literally these flowers are big. Now, they're 8-inch diameter flowers. You can get deep pink, red, the multicolor, you know, whites with reds and pinks with reds and white with pink. And there's several different varieties. Even on the foliage, there's some deep cuts in the foliage to make the foliage look a little more lacy or detailed. These are great plants. Funny enough, they seem very tropical, but they're considered waterways plants because they really don't need that much water. They bloom beautifully in the summer. Interesting enough, the flowers don't last very long. Like one flower may only last a day or two, but it seems like it's putting out new flowers. So it seems like the bush is blooming for at least a significant amount of time. even though each flower doesn't last very long at all. But once they grow, these can actually be cut down to the ground. Everything is herbaceous. So once it's done, once it's frozen and everything is dead on top, you can cut it right to the ground, and then the next year it'll send up shoots from the crown of the plant and be right back up at the 3 feet tall, just beautiful and blooming. Now, funny enough, I put purple coneflower on this slide, but notice the color. The Echinacea family is purple coneflower. Historically, it used to just be purple. You would have simple purple coneflower. Now then it kind of evolved. It was purple and white, and now you can get coneflower in any color. Notice the pictures. You can get really unique coneflowers in any color, and some of the cultivations are shorter, some are a little taller. These are deer-resistant plants. They're cold hardy. They're a great plant. If you like this style of flower, they're a great plant. They can be deadheaded to increase the productivity of flowering and to continue flowering them. But a great plant. Here's a couple more pictures of coneflowers. You're not just stuck with the traditional purple anymore. There's a whole range there, which are great. Now let's talk about green Santolina. Man, time is flying. I can't believe it. It's 7:30. I got to move a little faster. Green Santolina. These are interesting. They produce this funny little knobby button-like flower, as you notice in the picture below. They're just evergreen little shrubby things. I would actually consider them maybe more of a shrub than a perennial. Don't water them too much or they flop open in the middle and they don't look good. But otherwise, they stay nice and tight and rounded. There's a gray Santolina and a green Santolina. Low water, interesting texture. Probably don't need to say anything more about that one. All right, let's move into fall. Fall bloomers. Another salvia. This one's now a fall bloomer. So Raspberry Delight. Now, as you look at plant tags, you'll be able to know which ones bloom where. And back to what I said at the beginning, staggering plants with different colors and bloom times, you're going to change the whole look of your landscape as it migrates from spring to fall. And to me, that's interesting. It's a kind of evolving landscape and it looks great. And you add some grasses in there, the ornamental grasses, and by fall they've got their big seed heads on them, and then you've got different colors at different locations. And that's part of, to me, that's what's amazing about some well-done landscapes, is that there's constant color, but that color is changing where it is and even what it is. You might have something pink in the spring and then something yellow in the fall, and it just creates some real interest and coolness about it. But Raspberry Delight Salvia is a great one. Dark green foliage, but a really bright kind of this pinkish to reddish flower. Goes really nice with black-eyed Susans, with certain ornamental grasses. Blue Fortune Hyssop. I don't have a lot of text on this one, but this one's about 2 to 3 feet tall. It's a bigger plant. There's several hyssops. I'm going to show you a couple others in here. The bees love these. They're kind of a pollinator plant, blooms in the fall. A nice blue color. This one, notice how it's kind of flopping, indication that it's probably getting a little more water than it needs, which means it got a little bit fuller and heavier and just can't support its own weight because of too much water. Keep it leaner, it'll stay tighter. Black-eyed Susan. I throw this one in here because it's a great little perennial. There's several varieties now of black-eyed Susans, but to be honest, they are not a once-a-week watering type perennial. In heavier soils, clay soils, somewhere where it holds water more, maybe. But we actually use this as an indicator plant. When the black-eyed Susan is wilting, it's generally time to kind of water the zone, which happens about every 3 to 4 days on kind of your average landscapes. For real native landscapes or longer, if you really only want to water once a week, black-eyed Susan maybe doesn't go in that planting. Put it somewhere else because it'll wilt. In the heat of the summer, it'll wilt and you'll tell, oh yeah, that thing is stressed. It's not going to die, but it looks terrible and it needs water. Butterfly bush. Now I throw this one in here because it's a shrub, but I treat mine as a perennial. You can cut butterfly bush to the ground every single year. And by doing so, you'll keep it smaller. Notice in the picture, the big main picture, that shrub right there is about 4 feet tall. If you didn't cut it down every year, the shrub would be 10 feet tall. If you cut it down every year, you'll keep it at 4 or 5 feet tall, possibly even 6. It may grow 6 feet in 1 year. It keeps it refreshed, it keeps it invigorated, it keeps it full by cutting it to the ground every single year. You don't necessarily have to deadhead it. but once it's done with its flowers and there's just a dried flower stalk there, you can cut all those off, or you just wait until fall and then cut the whole thing to the ground and you're done with it. So I do that with mine. I treat it as a perennial. When I'm cleaning up perennials, I do this too, and I just cut it all down. And it sends up the new growth every year and it looks great. I don't have a rangy, old, tired shrub. Our evening primrose is a native plant. These are great, very tough, beautiful yellow in the fall. I will say one thing, the funny little seed heads from these, the seed pods, can blow and they can self-seed them fairly readily, not terribly, not like noxious weed status, but we get these a lot self-seeding. So just awareness of that. If you don't want anything that ever has a potential to self-seed, you would want to avoid this one. Otherwise, this is a tough plant, beautiful yellow in the fall, hardly needs any care. Just clean it up when it's done once a year. And it's good. Desert 4 o'clock. This one, I throw this one in here, but be cautious with this one because this is big. This is a big plant. It can be 2 feet tall and it can get 8 feet in diameter. I've grown these in park strips before, and it fills the whole park strip. An average park strip of 4.5 feet to 5 feet wide fills the whole thing, and I'm trimming them to keep them off the walk and out of the gutter, just to keep the concrete clear. So I kind of go underneath and prune it so it doesn't look hedged, but I prune it and cut at some of the underneath so I keep it back. But beautiful color, really tough. It forms a taproot. When it's done after frost, that whole thing kind of just severs off and you've got a big mass that you just dispose of, and then it's a blank slate underneath it. These can self-seed a bit. If the conditions are right, their seeds will grow new little babies. But this one's a really good, tough plant, beautiful, attracting to, hummingbirds or the hawk moths or the, whatever. Interesting, great plant, very low water, does fantastic. Okay, so hummingbird flower. Hummingbird flower is, let's see, perennial, 12 inches tall, dark green foliage. This is a really unique one. It's called Zauschneria. Now, you may hear it called several different things. One thing you'd want to consider, this one tolerates almost any condition. It'll tolerate shade, tolerates sun, tolerates a little bit more water, tolerates no water. This one was actually featured in a news story a couple of years ago as the plant of the year because of its unique and kind of all-encompassing characteristics where it can almost grow anywhere. And it's beautiful fall red. Hummingbirds love this plant. They're just drawn to it. Sometimes people call it a hummingbird flower. Anyway, they just love the little red trumpets on these. Once a year cleanup is easy. It spreads slowly, not obnoxious. If you can find this one, this is a great addition to any perennial landscape. It's just relatively low care and the positive features are fantastic. Let's talk about asters for just a second. There's late summer, fall blooming asters. That's where most of them fit. And as you can see from the photos on the bottom, quite a range of colors. Some people love asters, some people dislike asters. There's a few varieties of asters that I like and I tolerate. And then there's some that don't necessarily form a clump. They're kind of maybe like the wild asters or something. And even though the flower is pretty, the plant is not. But your cultivated asters are usually a nice, tightly mounded, fairly tall, nice fall color type plants. They can add to a landscape in the fall. If you don't like asters, one of the alternatives to that would be mums, garden mums, where they will bloom at about the same time and have a wide range, or very large range of color options. So you can use mums instead of asters to kind of get the same look and feel in a landscape from those colors. This one, Sunset Hyssop. This one gets about 20 to 24, well, I would actually say it's 24 to 36 inches tall. I have one of these in my yard now. And right now they're small because these are fall bloomers. So it's just foliage. It's about 12 inches tall right now. But this picture shows a whole clump of them. There's several in a row right here. These also are called hummingbird mint. If you smell the sunset hyssop, there's a few other cultivations of these, the Agastache plants. This one smells To some people, it smells like root beer. To some people, it smells like licorice, black licorice. It's anise hyssop. And so I like that fragrance. It smells really nice to me. If you rub it up against the foliage, it has a cool fragrance. Hummingbirds like this one as well. I think this is a great fall plant for a landscape. Here's another Agastache, the Texas hummingbird mint, kind of a close-up of that picture. Interesting plants, interesting foliage. I think they're really cool. Russian sage is a great low water plant. I would just caution you with this one. It can spread just from roots and suckers, and kind of, to me, this one definitely has to just be cut down. This one can become a shrub. It can get 3 to 4 feet tall, really rangy, really woody tissue in the middle. And so cut it to the ground. There is a variety that grows smaller, a lower, slower grower, and it grows shorter, still blooms, but it does have a great color to it, has a very interesting smell that some people find kind of over repulsive if you brush up, and it's strong. It's not repulsive, but it's strong. Bees really love this. If you want to attract bees to your yard, Russian sage, lavender, the hyssops, some of the, even penstemons, they all attract bees. The salvia, the May-night sage, they're just definite bee attractors. If you're opposed to bees, then you avoid those plants. But Russian sage is a great addition. If it just cut it, make sure and cut it to the ground every single year, and don't let it get out of control. Blue sage is one that's not really that full. It's a salvia, but it doesn't really fill in to make a densely tight planted something. It can be quite tall, 3 feet to 5 feet tall. I've rarely seen it 5 feet, more like a 3 to 4. Just cut it back yearly. It has the nice kind of pale blue flowers on it. Nice looking plant. Again, I'm just throwing all kinds of options in here for you to consider. Blue mist spirea, also known as blue mist shrub. And the spireas, many of the spireas are shrubs. We throw it in here with the classification perennials because it fits with perennials. Really nice, kind of the deeper blue flowers on it, 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, late summer. It can be a shrub, or you can kind of cut it back every year and treat it like a perennial, and it will actually grow back and does just fine. I like them. I think they're really nice fall blue color, a decent size, give it some structure and landscape. And then here's one that's fun, not suitable for every condition, not suitable for every location, your Santa Fe sunflower. This is a Chelianthus maximiliana Santa Fe. Now this thing will get 6 to 8 feet tall. Literally, it does get that tall, 4 feet wide. We've got some of these in the garden, and they've kind of grown. The mass has increased in size, and I think it's getting overcrowded now, so that the flower stalks aren't quite as tall. But this is a very late fall. Sometimes this is blooming as the leaves of the trees are changing color. It's in October. It's blooming in October. So it'll grow, and it's nice foliage all season long. It's getting taller and taller. And then finally, we're like to frost, and this will even go a little bit beyond frost. Then it blooms prolific yellow, really super bright. So it's almost your latest bloomer in the garden, the landscape, and it does really well with that. So before I move on to ground covers, there's a question about what time of year and what guidelines would I give for moving or dividing perennials? And that's a great question. I was going to kind of try to tie that in, but this is a great place to talk about that. You can divide or move perennials pretty much anytime, but it's best, honestly, it's best to divide and move them in the fall or the spring. And I would almost, my personal opinion is best to do it in the fall. In the fall, everything's shutting down. Most everything has already bloomed. And so you can dig up the entire perennial and divide it in half. If it's a taproot type perennial, you can't do that. But for most part, these are fibrous, and there's a lot of root material there, and the plant has just keep spreading wider. So you can divide the chunk in half. You can put one back in the ground, and you can take one and plant it somewhere else. Or sometimes you divide it into 4s or 6s. Shasta daisy, you can just dig a chunk off of that thing. You don't even have to dig up the whole plant. Just dig a chunk of it off. Make sure there's some roots to it. Take that and plant it somewhere else in the fall. Give it a little bit of water. Next spring, it should just pop right up and go. That's why I think fall's a good time. Don't wait too late in the season. You want to give the new ones a chance to start rooting in a little bit. And even though the temperatures drop, you won't see much top growth. The roots are still doing their thing. As long as that ground's not frozen, they'll keep doing their thing, establishing in, and by next spring they'll take off. So that's a great question. Anytime you want to divide, same with planting. That's why planting in the fall is such a great thing. Temperatures are cool. It's easier to keep them moist, easy to plant, but don't wait too long. I mean, nurseries overwinter stuff. A lot of stuff over winter is fine. Some stuff will winter kill if it's not really established and things don't work out that well. But great question though on when to do that. So I'm kind of at the tail end. I know a lot of you probably have a lot of things going on. I'm going to go through some ground covers quick and then just whiz through a few slides at the very, very end that you'll have to come back and reference on your own, because we're just simply going to run out of time on that. But let's go through some ground covers. Mesa Verde ice plant, fantastic. It's succulent. This is a purple. There's lots of ice plants. The Delosperma family. Nice rock gardens are just a dense forming mat anywhere. I've grown seeds. We have some in the garden. Ice plants are just cool. They're going to flower in the spring and fall. Kind of arranged mostly in the spring. Creeping thyme. Now this is one, somebody commented about creeping thyme earlier when I was asking a question about creeping phlox. Creeping thyme does bloom in the spring and it looks great in mass like this, or just as a, you can put pavers or stepping stones through it. There's different colors. There's red and pink. There's woolly thyme that has a unique grayish green texture. So the different foliage is different colors, and then the flowers can be different colors, making a really interesting low grower ground cover that creeps and dents and fills in everything nicely. So if you're considering a ground cover that's pretty tolerant, it's walkable, then that's a great plant to be using. And a question that kind of comes with this is, can the ground cover still grow spread on rock, on mulch or rocks? It will. If creeping thyme will spread no matter what. If it's close enough to soil, like bark mulch, and it can get its roots down through that to soil, it will actually root in as it grows out. Otherwise, it'll kind of be on top. This will even spread over the edges of concrete, and it kind of spreads. It doesn't root in. So if it has the ability to root in, it will. Otherwise, it just spreads on top. And if you want to trim it back, you come and you take your trimmers and you prune it all back. And creeping thyme is really easy that way. So it's a great question. Not all ground covers will do that. Some ground covers, to really spread, they need to be rooting in as they go, but creeping thyme is not one of those. So it does really quite fine. Turkish veronica is great, kind of a shade, tolerates light shade. It's actually good in shade. Nice blue color on it. In this case, this was at the Jordan Valley's garden where they were kind of creating a Turkish veronica lawn. It's a dark green foliage. It blooms like this in the spring, and then the rest of the time it's just low growing dark green foliage. So nice look. In pussy toes, Antenaria, the little flower looks like a cat's paw. And anyway, this one's a taller ground cover. Once the seed heads are all cut off, it looks like the picture on the very bottom. A good ground cover, low water alternative, pink little flowers, interesting. Sedum of all kinds. They're succulents, low growers. A few of them are taller. If you consider it a tall ground cover, some of these are up to 6 inches to 12 inches tall. Great rock garden plants, great ground cover plants. Don't need much care, don't need much water. Lots of different sedum varieties and options available. Most people don't use these in mass, and they don't use them where it's a walkable area, but they'll use them on borders and really hard to water places, because these are quite tough and tolerant. Creeping horehound. This was a super interesting plant. This one, I throw it in here because it's just so cool. You can find it mostly through mail order. I don't think I've ever seen this at a local nursery. Some of the native plant growers, if you can find it, might still be growing it, but I just threw it in here because it's such a unique little plant. The leaves, and it's tough, it's tolerant. It's a great taller ground cover if you could find it, but look around for that one online if you want it. Snow in summer is really common. Gray-green foliage, white flowers. I'm not going to say too much about it. It's a great ground cover. It grows well here. Some people love it, some people hate it. We have it in our learning garden. It does fine. It's a good option if you like that gray foliage and the white flowers. Here's a hardy yellow ice plant, just like the purple one. It can be grown in mass, can be grown in individual clumps. It's a succulent. the fall color of these, it's evergreen, but it does turn a bronzy, burgundy bronze color in the fall, bright green in the spring, yellow flowers. I don't have too much more to say about that one. Ice plants are cool. There's a range of colors on those whites. Now there's whites and oranges and purples and pinks. And another great, this one's actually a native plant, prairie wine cups. It looks nice and green. It has these nice little open kind of little cup-like flowers, and spreads to about 3 to 4 feet wide. This can be used in park strips. It can be just used in any location in rock gardens or wherever as a nice little ground cover. It's not a walkable ground cover like creeping thyme. And then a tall ground cover, understory plant or full sun, creeping Oregon grape. This will get about 12 inches tall, sometimes a little taller. It does have those really nice yellow flowers, and it does create an edible berry. That blue berry is edible. So you don't have to worry about any kids or anything eating those and dying. Great for a taller ground cover. These are really tall. And then the fall color of the leaves is that burgundy color. And they're evergreen. They're a little bit pokey, almost a little bit holly-like. You'll see these up in the foothills when you go hiking. If you hike up in the mountains a bit, you'll see these. They're cool plants. If you like something tall, maybe an understory ground cover, something like that, these work great. Okay, so kind of made it through most of those. Now, I'm going to go through the rest of these really quick, and then we'll just address some questions. So I've just thrown in, these are from another presentation that we have done here at the district that kind of lists some of these just in a list form, where you've got them by color, the pinks and reds, and then the in parentheses, it says S or M or L. That means small, medium, or large size. And how they grow, meaning small is going to be low to the ground, medium is going to be a little taller, large is going to be big. And so you've got them by color, red and pink, orange and yellows, blues, purples, whites, and spring. This one's a spring. And then I've shown a following, I'm going to just go through these quickly, just these different pictures of some of those listed. Notice the orange ice plant and a Turkish Veronica candy tuft. Some of these I've already talked about. Dianthus I didn't showcase here, but it's a great one. The avalanche white sun daisy, it's a short one. Again, I'm just showing you the geums, the Gila boards, they're great. I didn't show them in my other slides. These are just some other great options that you can look at in kind of in combinations in a landscape. Iris, I didn't talk about iris. It's a great perennial early spring, So just throwing some of these out there. Peonies, there's a few shrubs, roses and magnolias, they're peonies, they're all in here. Even some yucca. There's a few shrubs, 9-bark's a shrub, red valerian I've talked about, iris again, and now summer. So I have a list with summer, same thing, by color. Now there's more of these, so the list goes on into multiple pages. Some of these are already in the slides, some of them not, but kind of just again to give you a little bit of a list form. And then once again, some pictures of these. Lots of these I already talked about. So I'll just kind of quickly skim through these. As I mentioned, these slides will be posted so you can come back and take a little bit more time and look at these and get a feel. We do have additional, like I mentioned, we have more plants even in the garden that I've covered. What I've covered, all of these aren't necessarily in our learning garden, but we have plants in the learning garden that weren't necessarily in the presentation. For my time this time of year, things get really crazy. So what I've done is I kind of pieced together a whole bunch of stuff that I had because I just didn't have the time to spend to really do everything I wanted to do. So I apologize for that. And besides this, that would just make our presentation last for 2.5 hours, which some of you would be glad with, but some would probably get tired of listening to me. So again, and I will also mention, so here's fall, the list, and then a few I've already talked about just in there. So I will mention that right here at the end, our website, weaverbasin.com, there are some plant lists there now of what's in the learning garden. A few of those have maybe died since, but they're still on our list. We leave them on our list because we'll probably replace them. If not, they're still great plants. So we leave them on the list. There's other resources, conservationgardenpark.org, conservewater.utah.gov, where there's also additional plant lists. There's some links if you want to, if you're really into natives. We're going to be doing a native plant class coming up in August, where we'll focus strictly on native plants and then have some resources there that we try to direct you to. And then from here, just so you know, there will be more stuff that I'm not going to cover in the slides, where I have a whole bunch of grass stuff, because grasses are technically perennials. So I'll just kind of peruse this really quick so you can get an idea. So I have a lot of different grasses in here. I have some vines in here, and then even some flowering shrubs and some flowering trees, which we don't have time to cover in this perennial class, but I've got a lot of that in there. It'll be in these slides, it'll be online. So I just wanted to provide that to you. It was part of some other stuff I've done in the past. I figured, well, what the heck, it's more knowledge, and hopefully you'll enjoy it and can use it. And if you don't, that's okay too. You go through the perennial section and just enjoy that. So with that, I'm at the conclusion of my slides. That was like, to me, it felt like a marathon of perennials, and I've been talking what feels like 100 miles an hour. So hopefully it's not too, hopefully I haven't been too fast or too crazy. But if you have questions, please, let's do Q&A right now. Type in your questions. I know Hattie Ann's been answering questions. If you still have any questions, please type them into the Q&A box. I'll address them now. If not, thank you for coming. Really appreciate you participating. Just so you know, we will be starting to do some in-person classes in August at our facility in Layton. We're excited to do that. I know some of you really enjoy these. You don't have to leave your home, and these are a great way to do some of this. But there are some classes that just lend themselves better to be in person and have dialogue and engagement as we talk about stuff and show you things. So we'll be starting those again in August. Watch for those. They should be available on our website coming soon to register for those. We've got one class, only one in July because of the temperatures in July and everyone goes on vacations. We're doing only one class on composting and soils in July on the 19th. And so we can look forward to those, but please watch our website and follow those. You can also find that stuff on social media. But a couple questions here. Thank you for all the varieties and options. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Julie. Appreciate your participation and doing that. I'll just keep going through some of these. All of you that expressing thank you. I really appreciate you joining us. And hopefully this is really good information for you. Another question from Lynn, is Oregon grape somewhat noxious? I have not had that experience. It's usually fairly self-contained. I have not had it spreading or kind of getting overwhelming. All my experience with creeping Oregon grape is it's not really creeping. I mean, it kind of creeps where it is, but it's not like it takes off and seeds and does crazy things in any landscape that I've ever had experience with it. We have some of it in our learning garden now, and it's been no problem at all. So I know though, however, this is a good reminder for a lot of us. Every site somehow is a little bit unique. One person can have one experience and have no problems, and another person can plant the same plant in a slightly different microclimate, and they may have a different experience. Their soils may be different. They're just microclimate perfect conditions for it to seed or do something different. So just because the book says something, or just because I told you something, or somebody said, oh yeah, that'll do this. There are some environmental factors that you just don't control, and microclimates in a yard are as variable as anything. You know, from yard to yard, from city to city, you know, elevations from a lower valley to a upper bench areas, all of those things can have an influence. So these are general guidelines, general things. If you get something crazy happening, you know, share it. It might be cool, it might be unique, or you might just be pulling out your hair because, you know, you ended up with a weed like something. But certainly take that for what it's worth, that not every one of these is going to behave perfectly to what a tag says or a book says or a person says, because of those unique conditions within your own yard. So one more question here is, what can you grow on large boulders to cover them? Interesting. Why would you want to cover them? Most people want boulders because they want boulders. But I guess if it's a big wall, and maybe this is what you're going with, Val, is you've got a big retaining wall, it's boulders, it's a little unsightly, it's hot. You can grow several things in that. A lot of the things I talked about tonight that I mentioned were rock garden type plants, the ground cover things, creeping phlox works in those, the the abricias that I talked about, rock cress, ice plant, even though it kind of forms a mat, some of those that once they start growing in a crevice, if there's soil there, they'll trail down. They'll start covering boulders. You can get, some lower growing viney plants that can cover those up. Like vinca, honestly, will. Vinca's a little more aggressive and a little crazy sometimes, but you could stick vinca in the corners of rock walls and boulders, and it would cover them. There's other shrubby things that maybe grow from the top and trail down. Honeysuckle type things. There's kind of a few viney things that can be on the ground that can trail over the edge of a wall or over some rocks and cover them. I hope that gives you some idea. You could always email me or Hattie Ann, and we could maybe give you a few more. My email is D as in David, RICE @weberbasin.com. So drice@weberbasin.com. And then Hattie Ann is H Fassold, FASSOLD @weberbasin.com. So H Fassold or drice @weberbasin.com. So you could email both of us or any of us, and we can maybe provide a few more ideas for you there. So hopefully that gives you at least a few ideas. There are a lot of things that will actually grow in a rock wall, crevices that don't need a lot of water. They'll probably need a little to get established, but once they're established, they'd be fine. One view is that you should have only, let's see, this is another question from Bryce. One view is that you should only use plants that are native to the area. What is your view on that? I understand that view from some people. I don't necessarily share that view, just me, my personal opinion. I think there's a lot of room for a lot of plants. I think though that you should consider climate adapted plants, meaning it doesn't necessarily have to be native to the area, but you should definitely choose plants that are suitable and adapted to the climate that we're in. There are plants that nurseries bring in from the Pacific Northwest that just shouldn't be grown here. They may grow here, I just think they shouldn't be grown here. So I'm all about using proper plants for the right space, but I don't think you just have to go native. I love the native plants. There's some fantastic native plants. We have a great climate for native plants, and we have a lot of them. But I am of the opinion that there's room for a lot of other plants that are suitable to our climate that aren't native here, but they're native close to us. There's some native plants in New Mexico at the right elevations that thrive here. Native plants in Colorado that thrive here. So they're not native to us, but they're climate adapted to us. And even some of the cultivations, they're climate adapted to be low water, tolerate our poor soils, tolerate our terrible winters. I'm all of the opinion those can be used, but that's just me. So there are some strong opinions on both sides of that issue. I know that. But there was still one question we never got to, the question of, do I have an opinion of biochar? And I'm going to have to look that up, Tom, if you're still on. I don't know. I am not, by that term, biochar, and any information on that, I'd have to do a little looking. I may have read or come across something about that, and it's just not coming to my mind what that is or what I would say about that. So if you want to call us sometime, come in, we could have a conversation about that one. But up until then, I sorry, I don't know. And then when is the best time to plant ground cover? Can you germinate during winter? If you're seeding things, our winters, no, nothing really germinates in the winter. You can usually germinate things in the fall, and some types, it depends on what you're growing, some of them will not germinate until spring. It's just how some of these grow. The seeds, you can put them down in the fall and they'll sit there over winter, and then they'll germinate and grow in the spring. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to grow. And if you want to do them from seed, then yeah, you'd need to consider and do a little research on that. Otherwise, you can get starts. If they're already growing, then you can plant them anytime, but the best times, again, are spring or fall. And I prefer I prefer fall planting because it's getting all established and it's a little tougher going into spring and then summer than if you plant in May and then all of a sudden it's 100 degrees in June. That's a kind of a stressful time for brand new little plants. can be done, and spring's a good time to plant still. It's just a little bit harder to get them established fully before that real heat stress of summer kicks in. So I hope that answered that. And thank you for that question. That's a good question. Well, if there are no more questions, I'll wait just another second. I know sometimes it takes a minute to type in a question or whatever. Again, we appreciate you joining us. This is always fun to get on and do these. I wish we could engage with you a bit more. This format, just to avoid a lot of background noise, doesn't necessarily allow it, but we do enjoy the engagement and sharing this information with you. That's all the questions, I think. So I think we're going to end it. We'll just wrap it up again. Thank you. Come and visit us at the garden. It's open 8 to 8 every day. And if that's the only time you have on the weekends, a Sunday afternoon or evening, come up. It closes at 8. But certainly come up and check out the garden, or come up and visit and ask questions when you can. And with that, I'll go ahead and end from here. And thanks again for being with us. And everyone have a good night. If I can find how to end. There we go. All right. Have a good night, everybody.